coast of Blackstone Bay lies one of the ocean's strangest mysteries. For nearly 80 years, local fishermen have claimed that beneath the waves rests the remains of a railway line that should never have existed. Most dismiss the stories as folklore, until satellite scans revealed something impossible: perfectly straight lines, stretching deep beneath the sea. In 2025, marine archaeologist Daniel Carter received sonar data collected during a routine seabed survey, hidden beneath layers of sand. The images showed something unmistakable: twin railway tracks, extending for nearly 2 kilometers across the ocean floor. There were no historical records explaining how they got there. The discovery reopened stories that had been passed down for generations. Elderly fishermen spoke of hearing train whistles across the bay on foggy nights. Others claimed they had seen lights moving beneath the water. No one could explain them. Yet every story pointed to the same place. Daniel assembled a small exploration team. Their mission was simple: locate the submerged railway, document every detail, and finally answer a question that had puzzled the coast for generations. But none of them expected what they were about to find. Just after sunrise, Daniel entered the water. Visibility was surprisingly clear. Schools of fish drifted silently past. At first, there was nothing unusual. Then, a rusted steel rail emerged from the sand. Daniel brushed away decades of sand. More rails appeared. Then another section, then another. They were perfectly preserved, stretching into the darkness beyond the reach of sunlight. His dive light revealed something else: a railway signal, still standing, waiting, as though the next train had never stopped coming. Daniel continued following the railway. The deeper he swam, the quieter the ocean became. Schools of fish that had surrounded him only moments before suddenly disappeared. Even the smallest sea creatures avoided the tracks. Marine archaeologists often expect to find coral, shells, or sea life covering old structures. But these rails were different. They looked untouched, as though the ocean itself refused to claim them. 20 minutes into the dive, Daniel's flashlight revealed something that made no sense. A wooden telegraph pole, standing upright, more than 60 meters beneath the ocean. The wood should have collapsed decades ago. Instead, it remained perfectly upright. Attached to it was a single ceramic insulator, unbroken. Time had erased the world above, yet somehow, this forgotten railway still stood. Then, Daniel found the railway signal. Rust covered every inch of its surface, yet the signal arm was moving, slowly, back and forth. There was no current strong enough to move solid steel. Daniel reached toward it. Before his hand touched the metal, the signal stopped, completely still. His heartbeat echoed inside his helmet. Was it coincidence? Or had something just noticed him? Back aboard the research vessel, Captain Elias monitored the sonar. Suddenly, a massive shape appeared ahead of Daniel, nearly 100 meters long, resting directly on the railway. The outline was unmistakable. It wasn't rock. It wasn't a ship. Captain Elias immediately radioed Daniel. "You need to see this." Daniel looked ahead. His flashlight disappeared into complete darkness. Daniel switched on his secondary floodlight. The beam reached farther into the darkness. At first, he saw only steel. Then, wheels, massive iron wheels, one after another. A boiler, a smokestack. The front of an enormous steam locomotive emerged from the darkness, covered in coral, yet astonishingly intact. It was impossible. A full-size train, resting silently beneath the ocean. Daniel floated toward the first passenger carriage. Every window was broken. Every seat remained in place. Then, he noticed something unusual. One carriage door was open. It moved gently, as if someone had entered only moments before. Daniel aimed his flashlight inside. The beam disappeared into darkness. Then, his helmet camera captured something, a single footprint, pressed into the thick layer of silt inside the carriage. Fresh, impossible, because no diver had ever entered before. Daniel hovered outside the open carriage for several seconds. Years of underwater exploration had taught him one rule: never rush into an enclosed wreck. He checked his oxygen, 83% remaining, helmet lights, fully operational, communication link, stable. Slowly, he crossed the doorway. The beam from his helmet swept across rows of wooden passenger seats. Most were still standing. A thin layer of gray silt covered every surface. Nothing had disturbed this place for decades, or so it seemed. The seats were empty, but the train was not. A leather suitcase rested beneath one seat. Nearby, a child's red shoe, a woman's handbag, a silver pocket watch. Every object remained exactly where it had been left. Daniel carefully picked up the watch. It was frozen. The hands pointed to 8:17. He photographed it before placing it back exactly where he found it. Every discovery raised the same question. If the passengers had escaped, why had they left everything behind? Near the conductor's compartment, Daniel noticed a small piece of paper trapped beneath a rusted metal bracket. He carefully loosened it. It wasn't a map. It wasn't a letter. It was a train ticket, miraculously preserved inside a waterproof leather holder. The destination caught everyone's attention: Blackstone Central. The departure date matched the exact day the railway had supposedly vanished. Captain Elias spoke quietly over the radio. "Daniel, that line was officially abandoned 2 years before that date." The next carriage had once been a dining coach. Tables still stood in neat rows. Porcelain plates rested where meals had been served. Glass bottles remained upright. Even silver cutlery lay exactly where passengers had placed it. It looked less like a shipwreck and more like time itself had stopped. Daniel's flashlight moved across one table. 2 cups. One still contained dried tea leaves trapped beneath decades of mineral deposits. No signs of panic, no signs of struggle. It was as though everyone had simply disappeared. At the front of the locomotive, Daniel entered the engineer's cabin. Thick layers of rust covered the controls. Yet one gauge immediately caught his attention. The pressure needle wasn't resting at 0. It was still positioned halfway across the dial. Impossible. Steam pressure could not remain inside a boiler for decades. Daniel touched the brass housing. His hand stopped instantly. It wasn't cold. It was warm. Daniel's breathing became slower. Every instinct told him to leave. He turned toward the exit. Then, without warning, every light inside the locomotive flickered. Not electrical light. His own helmet lamps. The radio filled with static. Captain Elias called his name, but only fragments came through. Then the impossible happened. Somewhere ahead, deep inside the locomotive, a steam whistle echoed through the water. Long, low, powerful. The sound vibrated through Daniel's chest. Every instrument on his dive computer flashed at once. His compass spun wildly. Then, the locomotive shuddered, just once, as though something inside had awakened. Daniel looked toward the dark engine room. His flashlight beam disappeared into the blackness. Something had moved. Daniel remained perfectly still. At first, he thought the vibration had come from his own breathing. Then it happened again. A low metallic tremor traveled through the floor beneath his fins. The locomotive wasn't collapsing. It was vibrating, slowly, rhythmically, like a machine trying to wake after decades of silence. Daniel placed one gloved hand against the steel wall. He could feel it. Whatever had caused the movement, it was coming from deep inside the engine. Daniel carefully entered the engine room. His flashlight swept across enormous steam pipes, massive pistons, and the locomotive's boiler. Every gauge should have been dead. Every valve should have been frozen with rust. Instead, tiny streams of bubbles escaped from one pressure valve, fresh bubbles, rising toward the surface. Captain Elias watched Daniel's live camera feed in silence. No one aboard the research vessel could explain what they were seeing. Near the center of the cabin, Daniel found the main throttle. Thick layers of coral covered the handle. It had not been touched in decades. He leaned closer to photograph it. Suddenly, the lever moved, barely a few centimeters. Daniel froze. He checked for currents. Nothing. He examined the surrounding machinery. Nothing had shifted, yet the throttle now rested in a different position than it had seconds before. Someone, or something, had moved it. Before Daniel could react, every electronic instrument on his suit failed. His compass spun uncontrollably. The depth display flickered. His underwater camera froze for 3 seconds. Then, the sound returned, a steam whistle. Longer this time, louder. The vibration echoed through the locomotive. Schools of fish burst from the darkness outside. Even creatures that normally lived on the ocean floor fled into open water. Nature itself was running. Captain Elias stared at the sonar screen. His face turned pale. "Daniel!" His voice cracked. "Back away from the train." Daniel looked toward the enormous driving wheels. At first, they appeared motionless. Then, one wheel turned, only a few degrees, but enough to disturb decades of settled sediment. Clouds of sand erupted across the seabed. The impossible had become undeniable. The train had moved. Daniel turned to leave. Visibility disappeared almost instantly. Thick clouds of silt surrounded him. He could no longer see the exit. His compass continued spinning. Radio contact was gone. Then, through the darkness, 2 lights appeared, perfectly aligned, like the headlamps of an approaching locomotive. They grew brighter, closer. Daniel kicked backward with all his strength. The lights continued moving toward him. Then, everything went black. Darkness. For several seconds, Daniel saw nothing. His helmet lights had failed. His radio was silent. Even the glow from his dive computer had disappeared, floating in complete darkness beneath nearly 70 meters of water. Daniel did the only thing years of training had taught him. He stayed still. Then, a faint emergency light flickered back to life, just enough to reveal the carriage ahead. The 2 bright lights were gone. The train stood perfectly still, as though nothing had ever happened, as Daniel prepared to leave. Something caught his eye, a brass plaque fixed to the engine, covered in decades of corrosion. He gently brushed away the marine growth. Letters slowly emerged. Blackstone Coastal Railway, engine number 14. Beneath it, a final inscription, commissioned 1947. Daniel stopped. Every historical record said the railway had been abandoned in 1945. If the plaque was genuine, then this locomotive should never have existed. Daniel signaled the end of the dive. He released his marker buoy. Slowly, he began the long ascent. Every few meters, he looked back. The train disappeared beneath the darkness, until only the tracks remained. Then, they too vanished into the deep. 43 minutes after entering the wreck, Daniel finally reached the surface, back aboard the research vessel. The team gathered around Daniel's helmet camera footage. Every minute of the dive had been recorded, until the whistle. Exactly 6 minutes and 17 seconds of footage were gone. Not corrupted, not damaged, simply missing. The onboard recording system showed no explanation. The files had never existed. Before leaving, Captain Elias ordered one final sonar sweep. The crew watched the display in silence. The railway tracks were still there, but the locomotive was gone. No debris, no collapse, no disturbance. The train had simply disappeared. Only 2 parallel rails remained, stretching into the darkness of the ocean floor. The Blackstone expedition officially ended 3 days later. Researchers confirmed the existence of the submerged railway. They recovered fragments of steel, pieces of timber, and the brass identification plaque, but the locomotive was never found again. Today, divers still explore the waters of Blackstone Bay. Some claim they have seen the tracks. Others report hearing what sounds like a distant steam whistle, even though no train has traveled those rails for generations. Whether the ghost train beneath the ocean was an undiscovered wreck, an extraordinary natural phenomenon, or something that science has yet to explain, one fact remains. Somewhere beneath the waves, 2 lonely railway tracks still disappear into the darkness, waiting for the next explorer to follow them, because some mysteries are never truly left behind.